on this from Mohamed Okda, who's the director of Insight into Crisis. He joins us now live from Chicago. I think it's fair to say, Mohamed, that Mubarak was a very polarizing figure within Egypt. How do you think history will look upon his life and his legacy?
Definitely, history will look about what he have done to Egypt or didn't do to Egypt over 30 years of his reign. A little bit more than the current 50 million people population of Egypt today were born under his reign, and he had failed to deliver for them on everything. The scale of education, for example, quality had gone back decades under his reign, health care, infectious diseases, and an infrastructure. And he was an autocrat. He did not really plan well for the country. He had a lot of aid that is coming to Egypt, either from the Gulf state or from Europe or the United States, and he had not done that very well. People look at his legacy and they claim that he was a war hero during the war in the 1973 war with Israel, and we will give him that. But as a president, he had failed to deliver to Egyptians on all levels. And the current military dictatorship and tyranny now in Egypt is an extension of his regime. President Sisi was raised under Mubarak military regime, and he continued the legacy of Mubarak. And we will look back and see the revolution of 2011, which was all about toppling Mubarak and toppling the regime he has built. Mubarak is gone, but the regime is still there.
Ousted, just like Mohamed Morsi, but in the final days of Mubarak's life, it's a very different story than the final days of Morsi. Mubarak spending his life largely in luxury, comparing that to Morsi's inevitable fate in a prison.
Absolutely. I mean, Mubarak was one of the boys, the military boys, and they took care of him. They got him out of the legal system firm in 2017, and he was acquitted of many of the charges that he was charged with during the 2011 revolution, and he got to spend his last days in complete luxury surrounded by his family and friends, while President Morsi remained in detention for a few years, incommunicado, away from his family, away from his friends, without any medical care. I mean, the President Morsi family had requested medical care many times and on their own expense, and they were not allowed that. And we have to remember, President Morsi was the only democratically elected president in Egyptian history, while Mubarak was never democratically elected, and he used to rig elections for 30 years. And of course, we can say the same about President Sisi. I personally had suffered under Mubarak when it comes to the health scare. I was personally detained under Mubarak, and I went to exile under Mubarak. He was not a reformer by any means. He was not a Democrat by any means. And he had ruled with an iron fist, and many people had languished in jail during Mubarak. And he escaped justice and got to spend his last days, as I said, surrounded by friends and family in complete luxury.
Well, it's almost impossible, too, Mohamed, not to talk about the failings of the Arab Spring when we look at the death of Hosni Mubarak. Do you think his passing will have any sort of impact on the country's political landscape?
It will going to have a minor impact on the political landscape, because today we can see a lot of people, even from people who claim to be in the opposition to the Sisi regime, are giving warning mourning messages about Mubarak. So I can see the Egyptian youth are very angry now at the current opposition leadership and also at the current regime. And that is going to force people to change and look for new leaders when it comes to the revolution and to the opposition. From the regime side, it will actually cement Sisi's reign even more, because there have been also a conflict over the last 3 or 4 years between what I used to say Mubarak regime and Sisi crew. Sisi had inherited the deep state, but he did not control the deep state. Now that Mubarak is gone, he will be able to control the deep state and control even with a much harder iron fist Egypt for the next few years after the passing of Mubarak.
Mohamed Okda, we really appreciate your analysis as well as sharing your personal story with us. Thanks for coming on.